In this episode of the Flick Lab International Film Podcast, a little preview of coming attractions. Today we're going to look at Wolf Warrior 1 and 2, the Chinese blockbuster mega hits that have raised maybe some alarms in Hollywood regarding how Hollywood should on their own approach their new cinema, or whether this would be beginning to endanger Hollywood's influence in the Chinese box office. My name is Karri. I'm your host, and the second host here is Henrik. Hi.
Still desperately trying to get my citizenship in the People's Republic of China approved.
As you should.
As I should. These podcast episodes most definitely are doing no favors to that project.
Yeah. How is that job market going there, Henrik? Any work available anymore after our Sisu episodes or our Chinese episodes?
I'm actually starting to most positively dread for any kind of a future on this field, at least for myself.
Yeah, that's what you get here. Tears and ruined careers. Welcome to the Flick Lab. So, previously we did the episode on the battle at Lake Changjing 1 and 2. Now we're continuing on that road, checking out Wolf Warrior 1 and 2, which are also big mega hits in Chinese market. And actually Wolf Warrior 2 was the biggest box office mega hit, the biggest box office hit in China until the Changjings came along.
Yeah, I understood that Wolf Warrior 1, even though made profit and was a successful release, it still wasn't the same ballpark of Chinese mega blockbusters than what its sequel ended up to be.
Yeah, and I can see why in certain ways.
Yups.
Yeah, yeah, no secret there. It's a better movie.
It's way better movie than the second one is way better than the original. Although that being said, there are a choice of words to be said also for Wolf Warrior 2.
Right. And so, Wolf Warrior has also affected the politics in China, or at least the Wolf Warrior has been implemented into the lingo of the politics in China, in the sense that it refers in China to the more assertive and the more nationalist approach to foreign policy and diplomacy. Yeah, you can see where the name is coming from. And it kind of symbolizes the shift in China's approach to international relations. Maybe China is now more lenient towards its approach in its diplomacy and foreign policy. You know, there were a little change of trajectory around 2022, I believe. But before that, there were some international incidents, let's say, in France and Sweden, for example.
Yeah, speaking about that, I'm not entirely certain exactly how big of a shift in trajectory China has had as a nation and as a political entity. It most definitely, I would say, at the time, China does try to put up a better face than, what it perhaps may have done in the heyday of the Wolf Warrior politicians or Wolf Warrior diplomats. But at the same time, I have to admit, I am somewhat hesitant to actually yet give China full benefit of a doubt here.
Yeah.
It's kind of a situation where, yeah, moves towards softer leaning has been made. At the same time, I feel I haven't seen a full shift, or not even a complete 100% attempt at any type of a complete shift to a more lenient foreign policy from China's end. And also, China still wants to keep really odd bedfellows when it comes to, well, divisive crises, like, for example, the current situation in Ukraine. So it's kind of like I can see that China has made some type of attempt. Exactly like how well-meaning or how with their full heart in the attempt China is being. Well, I am kind of a hesitant, and I have a set of questions regarding that.
There's a lot of questions in the air, questions regarding whether it's the People's Republic of China that is actually changing the Hollywood movies as we speak to a more lenient approach towards depictions of China, or leaving China out of the movies altogether in some instances. And so is it actually the CCP in behind the curtain kind of pulling the strings, or is it just that Americans want to leave that hot potato out of it and just, keep it more simple, not cause any conflict?
And following that point, especially with today's outings, the two Wolf Warrior films, I also feel that it's proper to also propose the question that is it China who is changing Hollywood, or is it Hollywood that is changing China?
Absolutely.
Because I don't actually, because now having seen the two mega blockbusters, I'm kind of uncertain if Chinese films are exactly as untouched by the devious Hollywood fingers than perhaps they would want to believe.
Right, because what I'm watching, it perfectly translates to the Western audience. And, well, this is obvious to anyone who has watched Chinese action movies of late. Obviously, they take influences from, well, what is the lingo of cinema at the moment. Definitely that also entails Hollywood films. And I can perfectly see that an American person who has grown up on home action entertainment, he would be perfectly happy watching Wolf Warrior films. At least the second one. I think the first one just fails in very basic elements still, even if it has some kind of interesting action there.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
And on the same level, like a part of that, of course, the whole perhaps an imaginary counter argument here would be that those are kind of a compromises that Wolf Warrior films make just so that they can breach into the foreign cinema markets. Like they imitate old Hollywood action films, Rambo movies, just so that they would be easier to sell to the Western audiences, and this way get into outside of China into global markets. Like I can believe that would be like the first counter argument that somebody would throw against us, and to a point I can actually see that that could very much be the case. But I'm also kind of seeing that I see a possibility for a kind of an attitude shift when it comes to the movies, and when it comes to the ideas that Wolf Warrior films wanna play with. And with that attitude change here in two Wolf Warrior films, I'm kind of interested in asking the question here today that does it somehow speak for a larger attitude shift inside China itself?
Does it speak of a shift in that, or does it just speak of Chinese movie makers understanding what is selling in cinemas right now, what has been selling in their cinemas, and to what actually China seems to have taken some kind of a measures, in the sense that at least in the summer markets of movies, the international films, at least Hollywood films, I know are blocked so that the local cinema or the local movies can thrive. And that's also one reason why Wolf Warrior 2 seems to have been the success that it was. This came out in 2017, so yeah, way before COVID or anything. But yeah, is this a warning sign of any kind to Hollywood, or is this just market manipulation on CCP's end? Those are all questions.
It might even be a warning sign to China itself, depending on what is actually the answer to the question why. Why are we perceiving this attitude change in Wolf Warriors? Inside the movies, I mean.
When I was watching the second film, what came to my mind is that definitely this you may have seen Rambo more times than me, so maybe you can contribute on that. Does Wolf Warrior 2 seem like a modern day Rambo movie in a sense?
Yes, it does, but not directly with any one Rambo film.
Yeah.
Like the closest comparison that basically the entire world, or at least the Western world, has drawn with Wolf Warrior, especially with Wolf Warrior 2, is Rambo movies.
Right.
But what should be remembered here, or should be understood in those comments, is that they don't actually mean any specific Rambo movie. They are not drawing comparison between Wolf Warrior 2 and Rambo 2 or Rambo 3. Rambo is used here as a kind of as a shorthand to talk about a certain type of an action, well, not really genre, but subgenre of Hollywood action movies. It's to talk about Rambo as Rambo-esque movies, which was a whole thing that Hollywood pushed out in hundreds of films. We are talking about Missing in Actions, Rambos themselves, and in my opinion, yeah, when it comes to Rambo-type movies, Rambo Lights, Rambo clone movies, Wolf Warrior 2 is remarkably samey to those, but not like one-on-one principle. I would say when I was watching especially Wolf Warrior 2, but also with Wolf Warrior 1, the first image that came to my mind, the closest comparison that I automatically drew with the films to Hollywood, would be the mid-era Steven Seagal movies. You know, the time period with Seagal when he still wasn't ousted from Hollywood studios and he still would get Hollywood productions under his name, but like we would have been already past his prime time, you know, the Hard to Kills and the first Under Sieges. Wolf Warrior 2 kinda smells like, you know, Fire Down Below era Steven Seagal movie. You have the Unkillable Badass, you have the one set, one location situation.
Yeah.
And all the action, even though you have a lot of jumping, a lot of guns, a lot of explosions, kind of like, you know, that the mid-era Steven Seagal films, somehow they still, despite all of the bullet casings and all of the exploding TNT, they still felt somehow incredibly cheap.
Yeah, there's something lifeless about the first one, Wolf Warriors. When I watched it, I was like, oh gosh, do I have to go through again a set of Battle at Lake Changjing type of movies? And yeah, I was feeling that very strongly, but things did improve quite dramatically in part 2. And unfortunately for my audience, it is again kind of hard maybe to put the finger on why this is a problem in the first one. But there is something about the locations that just don't have the same dynamics as in the second one. And then, you know, the main plot elements are cheesy as fuck in the first one.
Well, I'm with you. The second one does improve. I'm hesitant to use the word dramatically. There is an undeniable improvement that happens, but it happens in quantities.
It happens in quantities. The action is something that improves quite a bit when it comes to all of the, you know, the plot elements themselves. not necessarily any improvement at all, like in human interactions and character motivations, or the point of having certain characters all together.
Yeah, that does happen. In my opinion, also the action, even though it most definitely it does improve, I wanna like emphasize this. Wolf Warrior 2 is a hell of a lot more better film than what Wolf Warrior 1 is.
Yeah, it's not
But
exactly a Terminator and Terminator 2 kind of situation.
it's not Terminator.
No.
Even at its best, Wolf Warrior 2 still, in my opinion, is in Steven Seagal camp.
Yeah, the characters are paper thin. That's a big problem. Even the main character, I just don't resonate with this guy.
Yeah, the whole character of Lei Feng, who is the titular wolf warrior in these films, there's a whole segment that we can actually kind of go to about what type of a character he really is, and does the character actually work?
In the end, he is the same character as in the Battle at Lake Changjin. The actor is exactly the same, and his role in this movie is to be the kind of soldier who is extremely loyal to the government. Well, perhaps even surprisingly, he does go against the orders of his troops, and then he gets ordered to move to the Wolf Warrior brigade or troops.
On the other hand, I actually felt that there was a massive gap between Battle at Lake Changjin and between Lei Feng in Wolf Warrior.
Well,
I was kinda even like surprised exactly how different the whole kind of central attitude of the character was.
Okay, well, both of them are very patriotic, and they would die for the country, and they would second guess that ever. That's the similarities. For sure.
Those are...
Yeah,
those are the similarities. But at the same time, that's also where, in my opinion, the similarities end.
Okay.
It's kind of like Lake Changjin and Wolf Warrior. If Die Hard, I would die for my country, patriotism would be a coin. I would say that those two are different sides of the coin.
But hey, talking of more specific elements perhaps of the movie, if we're up for that right now, there are some things that rub us in the West a little bit the wrong way. Do you want to start with the obvious?
Well, what is the obvious?
Well, if you can...
The fact that all the bad guys are white, or the henchmen are Westerners.
Actually, not so much. And unfortunately, if we have been approaching these episodes, Changjin and Wolf Warrior, from the aspect of let's find that Chinese propaganda that it reeks so bad that, we will laugh these movies out of the window. Unfortunately, Battle at Lake Changjin was even worse propaganda than Wolf Warrior is, and that's not saying much.
I'm not, once again, perhaps 100% with you on that.
Okay, fight me. Fight.
Okay. You can throw the opening punch. Then I will counter and beat your ass.
So, in my opinion, even though it has, that white people essentially are the bad guys, I don't think it overpronounces it that, hey, these are American bastards. Or you can find even more heinous examples in American cinema. I don't really find anything even to talk about the whole setup that this has been now flipped. These are not even, just straight up any American troops, or they are mercenaries who have left the United States Army and are, in the case of the first movie, these guys are working to deliver drugs. So Obviously they are bad guys. In a sense, there is no... Did you find any notion where the skin color would be like, or their nationality would be prime discussion point?
Not a situation where the nationality would be a prime discussion point, the nationalities will be mentioned most definitely, and the mercenaries are meant to be a shorthand for, well, a Westerner. And that's where, in my opinion, for example, this draws a heavy turn from Lake Changjing. Like, Lake Changjing still argued that the Western enemy that they are fighting is the US troops.
Yeah.
But in Wolf Warrior, the Western enemy that they are fighting is more just a shorthand to Westerner.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way, like the first films, a Filipino drug lord, drug kingpin, and his deadweight brother are, at the end of a day, just a shorthand for Filipinos. Like, yeah, the film talks about that our target is this one businessman who deals with arms and drugs, but as the final showdown of the film, when it comes to the chase near the Chinese border, shows us the real conflict there is between the Chinese nation and Philippines as a nation, since the whole black shirt army just all of a sudden starts to storm to save their drug lord businessman, whatever, chosen god, who, mind you, whose whole plan is to steal the super virus weapon from China to Philippines, so that the Philippines can then genetically engineer the virus to just kill all the Chinese people. So it's using a shorthand there. It doesn't say, it doesn't go into a lecture about the dastardly nature of the Americans. It just mentions American mercenary, and then it shows you a Russian mercenary, and then you have undefined Western lady sniper mercenary, and those mercenaries are meant to be shorthands for generally just the West. When it comes to color, however, yeah, that's actually the one department where the film does make it a like intentional talking point.
Where's that?
It's in Wolf Warrior 2, and this is like one of those moments where you kinda have to know what you are dealing with. Like I knew that Wolf Warriors were Chinese propaganda, so I was kind of very. I approach these with some caution, in the same way I approach the Lake Changjing. And part of my cautious project was that I did my best to actually track down the Chinese subtitles for these movies and then have them translated. Especially in the case of Wolf Warriors, since these both have English-talking characters, meaning that the film has to have been, their lines have to have been dubbed or subtitled for the Chinese audiences. And I actually managed to pull those. When it came to the Lake Changjing, no big differentiations between, the official English subtitles and the Chinese subtitles translated into English. But with Wolf Warrior 2, however, magic started to happen. And one prominent moment is at the very end of the film, when Lei Feng fights against Big Daddy, the main white bad guy of the film. Now, in the official English titles, or in the dialogue, what Big Daddy says to Lei Feng is that people like you have always been beneath people like me. Get used to it. And Lei Feng makes a kind of mysterious quote, "It's history," as he kills Big Daddy.
Yeah.
Which seems to come out of nowhere. But upon translating the Chinese subtitles that I managed to find for the film, apparently in the Chinese subtitling, Big Daddy states, "Your race will always be beneath mine. Get fucking used to it." And Lei Feng quotes, it's history. And even that counter argument, "it's history," from Lei Feng, it's actually supposed to be some one type of a dog whistle term or dog whistle for the Chinese audiences.
So you're saying that for Chinese audiences, they would have dubbed the audio for the American characters?
They would at least, in my opinion, like, once again, what I tracked down was subtitle files.
Yeah.
So I actually suspect that they have just subtitled the spoken in English dialogue for the Chinese audiences.
This all comes with a huge caveat, I'd say, that first of all, translating from Chinese to English is always prone to huge errors. But
it is. It is, but... and you know, to be transparent here, I didn't get any professional translator to work for me. I just used Google Translate, which also is known to make errors, especially when translating hard to translate languages, like for example Chinese.
But it seems like it's totally possible to happen at that moment. All right, interesting find. Do you have something more on that, or I will get to the next quirk?
Get to the next point, by all means.
Yeah. Well, technically, I don't know how this should be named. Is it misogyny, or is just something that is unfavorable towards women? When in the first part, it starts with this very awkward scene where the wolf warrior Leng Feng thinks he's just talking to his colleagues on the plane, but ends up blabbering all this information about radio, how he thinks, quote, "In my opinion, what this kind of woman needs is to be conquered by a man like me." And the leader of the operation of the wolf warrior gang, whose name is Long Xiaochun, commander of the Warwolf Company, she hears all of this. And instead of being disgusted or just shrugging it off as a kind of a punk, she seems to be totally attracted right after this notion. And some kind of a very ham-fisted love affair starts building out of nowhere between these two characters. I was telling about the characters and their motivations and how, thin they are. Here's one example of such behavior.
Yeah. And when it comes to possible accusations of misogyny to be thrown at Wolf Warrior films, and when it comes to theorizing like where that misogyny would stem from, is it a genre thing? Is it just bad writing? Or is it something, inherent to Chinese mentality when it comes to equality between sexes or lack thereof? Like, that's its own hot potato. But what truly did strike me as well is the fact that exactly how much shit the female commander Long Xiaoxin has to just swallow with here. Like, that's a good example of a moment in Wolf Warrior where I can just, accuse the film for misogyny. But even better example, in my opinion, is at the very end of the movie when Leng Feng is chasing after the film's bad guy, gets injured during the chase, and for a moment seems that Feng is down for the count until all of a sudden Feng breaks the graveyard silence and ask from Long Xiaxing if she's single. In front of the whole group, like there's an entire command center, room full of people, including other military higher-ups, like commanders, who equal Long Xiaxing in rank. And Leng Feng is just like, are you single? And Long Xiaxing is forced to answer that question. And not just answer it once, like when she states that, yes, I'm single, Leng Feng is like, can you repeat that? I didn't quite hear that. And then following that, the other general, who equals her in rank, grabs the comms and he's like, yeah, she's single.
A scene of anguish and skirmishing. Ugh.
I kind of felt bad for every single woman in that room at that moment. But that kind of is the very much in the core essence of Leng Feng, and through him, Wolf Warrior movies altogether. And that's actually one of the reasons why I feel that there is such of a big contrast when it comes to character in Wolf Warrior and when it comes to character in Battle at the Lake Chanxing. They kind of present almost, in my opinion, almost two completely different types of people or two different types of character when you are not looking at just, the one unifying fact, which is the die-hard patriotism towards the People's Republic of China.
Well, fair enough, looking from this viewpoint. Yeah, it's quite amazing to have this kind of a level of magnetism that he doesn't even need to meet her face to face more than, is it once? And then they're already publicly pussy whipping over the radio. But it does not end there. In the second film, there's also a scene in the Jeep where there is this Dr. Rachel who's ready to leave the car after she realizes that her only chance of survival, or that's how I read it, that because of her only chance of survival being this Chinese wolf warrior and not the Americans, who, by the way, they have already left along with their star-spangled banners.
Yeah.
Leng Feng, the wolf warrior, he asks Rachel whether she thinks that the Americans have the best troops or soldiers. She agrees, yeah. And then Leng Feng continues with some sentence that begins something like, "That could be, but they're not here now." So I just thought that was even a favorable sentiment, mildly so, towards the American troops. But maybe trying to cast this character as a weak character, someone who does not believe in the Chinese troops, a lady who needs to be saved and who is in the wrong. Or am I reading too much on that front?
Also a lady, mind you, who tried to get diplomatic help from American embassy in Africa by contacting them on Twitter.
That's made into a joke. Yeah.
It's made into a joke, but apparently the lady was like, that's exactly what she did.
Yeah.
That's the limit of her capability in the situation. You are in the middle of a civil war. I asked for help with a tweet.
Come on, lady, you won't find help in the American social media.
Yeah. But then again, in her defense, like no Twitter, Twitter or no Twitter, she couldn't have found any foreign help, seeing how, well, the Americans had already pulled out, every other Western nation had already pulled out, and United Nations, which exists in this film, in Wolf Warrior 2, only in dialogue and in one helicopter, is so impotent that they can't do absolutely anything to in any way affect the situation in Africa. In fact, Chinese Navy, which makes a huge deal how they actually can't enforce anything in Africa, seeing how that is a foreign nation, and national army, like the Chinese Navy, can't just come there and start affecting the situation. Even they managed to actually be way more helpful and have a much larger stake in what happens in the film and how the conflict develops, and especially how the conflict in the end ends, than America, than the entire Western world, and than the United Nations.
And there was this notion when Leng Feng was trying to put Dr. Rachel into the UN helicopter. I guess you more or less alluded to that part where he says, "I'm more capable of protecting them than you," referring to the Africans, as the film likes to refer to them, Africans. And that's kinda maybe an insidious notion. I know that they're in the middle of a war zone, but like, come on. She was there able to help them as a doctor. wolf warrior Lang Feng is not able to help them as a doctor. I'm just saying that that was sounded really like a masculine point. Like, look, lady, this is a war zone. You're not needed here. You can't help in any way. I'll take you out of here, and gets the finger for it. Well, regarding the representation of the African characters, yes, as that is a big part of Wolf Warrior 2, it is notable for its portrayal of the African characters and the African country as a setting. The problem arises, though, that they have come up with at least 5, 6 different names of places, cities, towns, regions, which are all made up, by the way, but they can't name a single time the country that they're in, because it's all just referred to Africa, and hey you Africans, go to this side of the hangar, and the Chinese to this side. Is this trying to say that the Chinese, is this kind of like a insult on the home audience's intelligence that they can't, pick up some names in their school or during their life of different African countries? Like, why are you referring to it only as Africa and Africans? Come on.
Yeah, that actually is I get your point, and you by no means are wrong. I'm kind of more lenient there with that thought in the movies. It's kind of, it's basically the same mistake that American media does almost constantly. There is something I don't know if that's a tendency stemming from China itself and China's attitudes towards Africa. We do know that China is somewhat, well, let's say self-centered when it comes to the way how it views the rest of the world.
And let's note this to be sure. This also, yeah, like you kind of alluded, also Americans are prone to this problem.
Yeah, China. Yeah, this is those times when China is not at it alone. America also has hard time remembering that Africa is actually a continent and that it is like the landmass that is Africa is a constellation of many individual countries.
Right. Yeah, I just felt that throughout the movie this just kept irking me. And what if you would flip that around? Okay, we would refer to, if they were Ethiopians, okay, Ethiopians go to this side of the hangar, and Asians, you stay there. Just referring to them blankly as Asians. How's that? How's that, China? How does it feel?
Yeah. Then again, China, I would say, kind of does know exactly how that feels, seeing how that is the treatment that, well, Western cinema,
Yeah,
especially American cinema, has subjugated Chinese people and well, Asian people too. Like, so it's not like, well, we in Finland, we are actually quite innocent of doing this, but we can't. But the Western territories can't really wash their hands from this problem and say that, well, we never. And Americans most definitely can't wash their hands from this accusation. But even though China has been subjugated to this treatment, does not automatically mean that China is now somehow allowed or forgiven to commit Africa to the same treatment.
Yeah, precisely. I wouldn't say that if that's what you were saying, that Finns are not really prone to this sort of mistake. They most definitely,
well,
I think to a lesser extent now, perhaps.
Yeah, when it comes to generalization, by no means Finland is not innocent. What I was aiming at is that, well, we never actually managed to make a film that I can quickly name that would have actually played the generalization card.
Right, yeah.
Something that affects the situation, perhaps, in large quantities, is the fact that, well, that Finnish filmmaking is quite of a small business, and we haven't made that many films, and the films that we have made usually just is something happens in Finland. And we don't really have, like, Finnish movies don't largely deal with taking any type of a perspective or looking at the world outside of Finland, which may of course has played a hand here in this situation. Like, since we don't make global adventure films here in Finland, there really is not that many times. There hasn't been that many time for us to actually do a film that would largely generalize the world outside of Finland.
Choreography, stunt work, I kind of enjoyed, especially in the second one. It was well shot and quick, and yeah, just a joy to look at.
I don't know about a joy to look at.
Well,
It was well shot, but in my opinion, not actually without its grievances.
not without its grievances. Perhaps it just felt so good after my grievances of the first movie that I was definitely.
Yeah, I can understand that. Then again, when it comes to the cinematography in the second film, I kind of felt that the cinematographer dropped the ball in the opening underwater fight, for example. Kind of became a mess to actually locate where the people were, who was punching in what direction. Also, of course, the physics didn't actually work. You can't really have strength in your punch when you're fighting underwater, but whatevs. But that's one of the running problems that I did have with Wolf Warrior films throughout both movies. I kind of felt that the camera was spinning too much. It wanted to do too many moves.
Yeah.
In situations where like enemies are storming from the front, from the back, from the sides, and it kind of becomes a jumbled mess exactly where the characters are and what they are looking at and where are they pointing their guns at, etc., etc. A second problem that I have, and I know that the cinematographer itself is not at fault here because he can't help the way how the stunt was done. But for example, the second film has the factory fight scene, has the stunt where Lei Feng runs up the stairs and jumps through the window to land at the office to save the hostage from was it the black mercenary dude?
Right.
And boy oh howdy, did I actually wish that would have been one take, where we could have just follow Lei Feng running the stairs, making the jump, and crash landing through the window. Just one continuous shot. Now, obviously, yeah, I know how they made the stunt, that it was made in two parts. So I can't say that, bad cinematographer, and I can't say bad editor. They had to make the best with the material that they had. But seeing how hands-on Wolf Warrior wants to be on its stunts, seeing how hard it wants to be, well, basically the next Jackie Chan thing, where to a point where both films have the failed stunts and injuries making this movie real, playing with the end credits, just like all the old Jackie Chan features. I really was hoping that, the cinematographer and the editor would have found a better way to shoot and cut that stunt than the one that they utilized in the film. Because in here, in my opinion, it kind of takes the wind out of the whole I jumped through this window thing, the way how it's actually, in the end, executed in the film. As a stunt, as in the way how it was shot, and also as in the way how it was edited. I think basically all the departments dropped the ball there. And that's something that I was kind of, every so often, that was something that just, picked its head. I felt that these three departments dropped the ball, and I was seeing moments, I was seeing stunts that could have been so goddamn good, that could have get you so hyped on the action, if these three departments just would have done a better job.
Another thing that is kind of obvious when watching the films, but gonna mention it anyway, is the, I don't know, overuse of CGI, but just bad CGI. Ooh. And I would say too much use of it. For example, having those drones done completely in CGI what definitely looks like it. I would say seems
or
unnecessary.
It's absolutely unnecessary. There are walls that break where you have a practical wall, and then CGI powders are just added into the picture,
Oh my
and you can
god.
clearly tell which one is which one is practical, which one is CGI, because the CGI looks infinitely worse in those moments. You have things like the entire wolf pack in Wolf Warrior 1. It's like 7 wolves,
Yeah. I was.
all with CGI, and it's absolutely horrible. CGI is one department where these films do improve. Like Wolf
Well,
Warrior 2, CGI is at the level of PS2 cutscene. And in Wolf Warrior 2, in Wolf Warrior 1, the CGI is at the level of a PS2 cutscene. And in Wolf Warrior 2, they managed to upgrade it to PS3.
that's a pretty accurate assessment. And
The thing that they don't actually manage to upgrade is the bloody ADR, which comes even more prominent in Wolf Warrior 2. And oh my god, if that's not horrible to hear.
I did notice that when they're speaking to the radio or the megaphone. But yeah, that wolf scene and why the wolves do not escape the situation. It's completely unnatural. They do not care about gunshots. Just keep coming in packs.
Yeah, and you also get like you do remember the early days of American blockbusters when the Americans figured out that hey, with computer graphics we can implement characters and beings into the film that don't really exist.
Arachnophobia, snakes on a plane.
Yeah, all of those. I'm looking even more way back, like Mortal Kombat 1. And Liu Kang versus Reptile, as Reptile was a bloody lizard.
It's been a while.
And
I was a kid.
it's been a while. But even in those films, you can kind of see that the flesh and bone actors kind of don't. They kind of can't just mask the fact that whatever they are fighting against, be it a monster, be it a snake on a plane, it doesn't really exist there. Like, yeah, there's something like they try to hit it, and you kind of just see that they are hitting the thin air, and they are just... the effect just doesn't work. And at Wolf Warrior 1, when they are fighting against the wolves, the pack of wolves, like, exactly the same effect. You can see that everyone, when they attach the bayonets and when they try to fight the wolves there, you can see that they are shooting thin air. They are hitting thin air with their rifles.
Absolutely should have put that scene on a cutting room floor. What's the purpose of that scene? Except that they're wolves against wolves. Yay.
Yeah. Before we get to the quickies, in the beginning of the episode, I was wondering, like, does Wolf Warrior, does it somehow channel or communicate some type of attitude shift that would be going on inside of China, or if the film's attitudes simply stem from the fact that that Wolf Warriors obviously want to copy, well, basically I would say 80s Hollywood action films and just give them just a quick modern polish. And to kind of linger on that question just a bit more. Now, last time we talked about Battle at Lake Changjing, and we talked about the film's directors, including Tsui Hark, and his Once Upon a Time in China film series got mentioned in that discussion. And Once Upon a Time in China, well, those are martial arts movies that mainly take place in China. And martial arts movies often deal with this concept that I can't kind of pronounce, but I guess it's called Jianghu, or like a more flowery version, rivers and lakes outlaw world, which I've understood marks kind of a spiritual border between order and chaos. A spiritual border here meaning a different, as inside of the nation itself. The general idea is that there is mainland China, which is the nation that has the geographical location that we can find on the map. And that mainland China is orderly and well-behaving place, formed by orderly and well-behaving Chinese people. But it does house inside of it Jianghu, which is a kind of an ideological sphere inside of China where outlaw element would exist. So, in other words, it's an attempt to kind of differentiate between, a hard-working, law-abiding Chinese citizen and a Chinese citizen who is a violent, angry farmer, who is a bandit, who is a Chinese pirate, who is a violent bush fiend. These are all people who still exist inside of China, the nation, but instead of being representatives of China like well-behaving folks, spiritually they would be presenting Jianghu, since they don't follow the orderly behavior. And that's something that is, in my opinion, expressed in martial arts movies like Once Upon a Time in China. But just like Once Upon a Time in China Part 6, which takes place in US, Wolf Warrior takes, in my opinion, the concept of Jianghu and places it outside of China itself. In Wolf Warrior 1, it's placed with the downright genocidal Filipinos. Leng has to stop them at the China-Philippine border, and Wolf Warrior 2, in my opinion, takes the concept of Jianghu and places it to Africa.
Okay.
And in my opinion, the importance that the whole idea that I'm ballparking here, that the whole concept of Jianghu is one of the reasons why it's so important that Leng is located outside of People's Republic of China. And especially in Wolf Warrior 2 has been banished from the Chinese armed forces because of his failure to obey commands. Because that means that if Jianghu is somewhere outside of China, now Leng can exist wherever Jianghu is. And what that pattern also invokes is kind of a much older model of behavior, or Chinese behavior. Kamlui famously argues that Chinese culture, there are two patterns, there are two positive models of masculinity. One that is refined, one that is called Wen masculinity, which is usually the officially approved version of masculinity. It's typified by the scholars, gentlemen, soft figures of great leaning with no aggressive characteristics, and these are like the people who go with the flow, who suppress their inner feelings and their aggression, suppress their greed, their lust, or the negative attributes, and keep them in control, and are these balanced, kind of a almost with Zen attitude, behaving members of the society. These would be examples of Wen masculinity. The other masculinity would be more martial or Wu masculinity, which is more closer to the typical Western macho masculinity. And the difference between how the Chinese society perhaps has approached these two masculinities, not only has Wen masculinity usually been the one that has been championed as more attractive to more women, kind of a more contributing to the society at large, but also it has been seen that the Wen men are the ones that rule the kingdom and the home, and the people presenting Wu masculinity would act in the space outside of civilization to secure the civilization's borders, in this case China. So Wu men would be those who wouldn't really exist inside of China, but would be in Wolf Warrior 2 fashion, for example, in Africa, and they working there to protect China's borders and China's interests. And the reason why this started to intrigue me is because Leng, like we talked about Leng's misogynistic attitudes, so therefore Leng obviously presents the Wu masculinity, and he still is kind of in control of his violent tendencies in Wolf Warrior 2, where he still, mind you, he lets the bad guy keep his life at the end of it. But in Wolf Warrior 2, we often see him in the jaws of almost psychopathical aggression. Leng loses his cool and loses his shit a number of times in Wolf Warrior 2, showing extremely hard and violent masculinity. And he full-on loses all control, and becomes a complete monster in the final act when he kills Big Daddy, whereas in Wolf Warrior 1, Ming Leng was allowed to keep his life. And in my opinion, this kinda, the fact that Wolf Warrior 2 is a giant-ass mega blockbuster in China, the fact that Leng as a character is allowed to go so deep into, well, borderline psychopathic behavior, and be so aggressively violent, and this way going against the more older, more traditionally championed version of Chinese masculinity, I kind of have to ask if it's like two questions rise to me from that. The first one is that is it truly so that China, or at least Wolf Warrior franchise, sees the entire world outside of China as Jianghu? Do the films champion that China is the safe mainland country, and everything that exists outside of China, even its close border neighbors like the Philippines, are these lawless, out of bounds, kind of like lawless bandit wastelands?
So that
where
you mean
just
that
crime and rape just happens.
so
And they are all out to get you.
so you're saying that because he's allowed to be in a different country in Wolf Warrior 2, he has to kind of become like the horrible, unsophisticated beasts that are there, and that is weird to be allowed to be seen on Chinese cinema.
In my opinion, he is a weird, a violent beast from the get-go.
But you're referring to him as having the Wu masculinity in the part 2, which also...
in my opinion, he does have it in part 1 also. But it's more in control in part 1.
In other words, martial valor.
In other words, yeah, martial valor.
Okay.
But I do see the Wu masculinity in him also in the first one. Like both films make the case that Leng can't follow orders, can't suppress himself to the control and hierarchy of his uppers, his generals. He's a soldier who constantly refuses to listen what the generals and the higher-ups tell him to do, constantly breaking against the rules.
But that's not martial valor, right? The Wu is seen as a good type of masculinity, not out-of-bounds masculinity behavior.
I, on the other hand, think that, I kind of gotten the image that from these two masculinities, Wu would traditionally be seen as the lesser masculinity.
Okay.
Like when masculinity would be the one that is more championed or more encouraged, since that masculinity is softer, it's more lenient to someone telling you what to do, so you're kind of more easier to be ruled, and also because that masculinity can perhaps better kind of build the society where the masculinity would exist, or when men would be better at building China as a nation than perhaps those showing Wu masculinity.
Okay, well, I can't challenge you here. I haven't done my reading on this part.
Yeah. I'm not making a case that I'm an expert here, since I'm not expert on China. But the second question that I actually rose to my mind from from Wolf Warrior movies is that if the answer to the first question, does Wolf Warrior franchise see the entire world outside of China as Jianghu, then the follow-up question, if yes, does that then mean that in true Wu Man style, going completely against the traditional Chinese idea of suppressing your desires and your violent tendencies, Wolf Warrior would then argues that in order to oppose Jianghu, you have to adopt this anything must go mentality. So does Wolf Warrior kinda champion the idea that instead of staying in control of yourself, instead of suppressing your desires for violence, you instead should take this mentality where everything can be sacrificed in order for you to win. You can be as violent as possible, you can be as sadistic as possible, you can be downright psychopathic, you can hurt anyone you want, you can betray your friends, do whatever as long as you win.
That's kind of the vibe I'm getting. Anything for the motherland, whether you're abroad or wherever in the world.
Yeah.
As stated in the ending.
In my opinion, it's perhaps somewhat even surprising, because I got the same reading that was the way that that was the message that Wolf Warrior movies wanted to give to you, especially the second one. And that's, in my opinion, that's a huge contrast to the battle at Lake Chanxing, where basically the whole battalion is willing to just sacrifice themselves. And the whole point of at the end of a day, for the two movies, is that the fucking Regiment 7 has to show up one man strong and still sign up for duty. Like, in my opinion, in Battle at Lake Chanxing, you see more of the Wen masculinity, where they suppress basically all their own inner desires just in order to be there, or just in order to make it for the next assignment. Just everything personally wise is to be sacrificed just so that the platoon or the battalion, the 7th battalion of that film, can make it to the headquarters and show up to the commandants and get the bloody flag that "please don't die" is handed at the end of the film.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting, and I can completely see why the Wolf Warrior politics term is known in China.
Yeah, and following that, it's in Western Rambo-esque media landscape, we are kind of used to the idea that the hero does whatever it takes to win. And we are used to the idea of these lone wolf heroes. Our John Rambos and basically everything played by Steven Seagal. But I would kind of almost argue that type of mentality is kind of, in my opinion, it's not so... Or I personally haven't seen that type of mentality so often in Chinese media. So, to me, Wolf Warrior can... So, I'm kind of wondering, is Wolf Warrior a mirror for a larger tonal shift currently taking place inside of China? Or is China, or are Chinese men in general starting kind of making a shift from Wen masculinity to Wu masculinity and championing the Wu masculinity?
If I had to make a wild guess, yes. The public seems to be in support of these more brute force, Wolf Warrior-esque political takes on international affairs. The Xi Jinping escalatory language is at an all-time high at the moment. But I think, yeah, to answer your question, I think it seems to be popular way of approaching all the things that irk Chinese in international affairs.
Okay. Well, it would be really exciting to see exactly how China perhaps possibly is going to change in the future as a result.
And you said that you haven't seen this kind of behavior in Chinese media before. And I would even say that I haven't seen this kind of behavior in American media before. Like this... Maybe it's not fair to say that what we see in Wolf Warrior 1 and 2 would be... Okay, let me rephrase that a little bit. I have to be careful here. I think it would be too much to say that the Wolf Warrior movies would be speaking of some kind of a inferiority complex in China, but it might be speaking of certain frustrations that China feels when it comes to international politics, that their country is being criticized, sometimes for valid reasons, reasons that are not being addressed, like the Uyghur Muslims situation, and not being completely open about it. But I can see how this constant criticizing of the China might affect the public opinion and veer it into the negative opinion of the outside world, or at least the Western so-called hegemony. And that might be dangerous, because I haven't seen this such of an offensive way, perhaps, small things like the end titles of the film Wolf Warrior 2. I haven't seen that kind of mentality in American movies where they would state that we would be ready to do anything to defend America, or am I pushing it? I don't know.
No, you actually aren't pushing it. That's a good call, actually.
Yeah.
The end titles of the film. Because Wolf Warrior 2 closes with the shot of with a shot of the Lei Feng's passport. And the message on the screen states, well, once again roughly translated, to the citizens of People's Republic of China, when you find yourself in danger in a foreign country, never give up hope. China's strength will always support you, Leng Feng.
That actually a bit disturbed me a little bit.
Yeah, it did me also. Also, I once again, this is a desperate attempt for me to try to translate an internet image of Chinese Wolf Warrior 2 poster, but the best translation I managed to get for Wolf Warrior 2's tagline would be, "Whoever offends the Chinese will be wiped out, no matter how far away."
Holy shit.
Once again, that's me trying to do translations. So, I may have just fucked it up a bit. But you talked about the possibility of a Chinese inferiority complex showing up in Wolf Warrior films. And I'm kind of going to half challenge you, because I actually think that perhaps an inferiority complex does show up in Wolf Warrior 2.
Okay.
Or at least some type of a feeling, or some type of a feeling of a legacy of a humiliation. And in here I'm harking back into the last line Leng Feng says to Big Daddy. It's history. Which is kind of a, like I said, it felt kind of like a cryptic dog whistle for the Chinese audiences. Now, Chris Perry made an article where he argued that what that line was meant to symbolize for the Chinese audience would be the time when Chairman Mao famously dated the beginnings of modern Chinese history to the 19th century Opium Wars, when the British gunboats forced the country to open its borders.
Yeah.
And this would kind of be a century of humiliation. Now, I'm not completely certain where Chris Perry in his article draws this comparison, but if Chris Perry really is at the right here, if the line "it's history" is meant to kind of give the Chinese audiences of Wolf Warrior 2 some type of a way to mend over the historical, atrocities of the Opium Wars and the British involvement in those cases. In that case, I could actually see that there would be a legacy of humiliation, that the Chinese would still be kind of tied up with, or they couldn't have yet gotten over with. And therefore, and from that point, perhaps Wolf Warrior 2 is talking about a Chinese inferiority complex. I admit, it's a bit of a reach.
Yeah.
If Perry is right, in that case, yeah, Wolf Warrior 2 could be an example how modern day China is trying to tackle and get over its inferiority complex.
Yeah. If that's the right word, or if the movie is more like an angry rebuttal of everything where China has stayed silent, tried to play, I guess, the friendly international diplomacy, whereas they often get criticism from America's direction, and this might be like the enough moment.
Yeah, but it is a curious line.
It is a curious subtitles. Let's say that the subtitles are actually kind of a mess, so I wouldn't put too much faith into the English subtitles either.
Yeah, that is true.
All right. Any special mention for an actor that you would like to provide?
I will give my special mention to. Well, I should give it to Jing Wu, who plays Pleng Feng and is the main guy here, but I end up giving it to Frank Grillo, who is actually surprisingly capable B-list Hollywood action star every now and then, visiting also A-list features like those Marvel movies, playing bad guy here, and in Wolf Warrior 2, giving a really strong performance as an American actor desperately trying to cash in a big paycheck.
Yeah, to my surprise, also I didn't realize watching it while watching the movie, but he's also known for playing like a supporting role in the first seasons of Prison Break, which I just finished the whole Prison Break TV series. So yeah, he's playing Nick Savrin in season 1 and 2. So kind of surprised to see him here. And if you look at, most of his bios, they don't really address his involvement in Wolf Warrior 2, which is kind of ridiculous because it's one of his, it's a huge thing inside China anyway.
It's also surprising in the sense that I'm not certain exactly how Grillo himself feels about his involvement in Wolf Warrior 2, but he has given public interviews about his role where he has talked highly about his movie and about the movie and about the shoot and how it all went. He has been proud of the fact that his character Big Daddy ended up being an action figure in Chinese toy markets. So unless Frank Grillo has changed his mind lately, he's not someone who looks back at Wolf Warrior 2 and has this gust of shame on top of him. And he's like, oh my god, I have to quiet this film down permanently. And if he doesn't feel that shame, then it actually raises a really good question. Why Wolf Warrior 2 is so invisible in Frank Grillo's resume?
Could be like the public ignorance regarding the film.
Yeah, could be. But then again, Frank Grillo has given public interviews about the movie.
Yeah.
So someone should know about it.
Yeah. Well, on my part, I will just give it to Jian Hang or Hans Zhang, which I called during watching Wolf Warrior 2 as the K-pop soldier. And lo and behold, once again, the pretty boy is a singer in China. They're all singers. All of these guys who seem to be bringing their face toolkit to the set of the movie to look as shiny as possible. Not that there was anything really that particularly amazing about the performance, but just wanted to bring up this character who is not a K-pop star, but I was like, yeah, if we want to go with, stereotypes here, bring attention to some very small role in the film that you found somehow worth highlighting.
Mine would be the CGI wolves, I guess.
Hey, let's give it to CGI wolves. I will steal this one. What worked? Well, for me, what worked was, I guess, just the interesting subject of showing the Chinese in Africa, just bringing this subject to the forefront, and the Chino-Russian relations there, or at least in the context of the movie, it was interesting that we had like a Russian baddie in the movie. Russians being the other big, I don't know how to say, occupiers of certain African countries now, and having big business going on around there. So that was interesting. But what like worked? Whew. The action at times. I will give it to the second part. The action was well choreographed.
Yeah, on my end, I would kind of say that the propaganda, and not in the sense that the propaganda itself would have necessarily worked for me. Like I was applying for Chinese citizenship, hail communism, way before I ever watched Wolf Warrior movies.
Right.
I'm still trying to have Xi Jinping's face tattooed in my left butt cheek here. But what I mean with the propaganda working is the fact that, well, once again, harkening back into our previous episode, Battle at Lake Chanxing. Now, that was extremely obvious in its propaganda and the messaging of that propaganda. And there really was not that much to talk about or think about in the propagandistic content of that film. And I'm not making the case that Wolf Warrior films are great propaganda. It's not really subtle. Like you can are Wolf Warrior movies, are they thematic propaganda? Yeah, they are. Do you notice it? Absolutely, yeah. But I do think that at times the propaganda in Wolf Warrior is a bit more smarter than what it was in Battle at Lake Chanxing. I'm looking at, for example, the moment when in Wolf Warrior 2 they are at the factory, and it comes evident that there's a limited number of people that can be rescued from that factory, and the factory's owner's initial response is to separate the Chinese citizens who are to be rescued from the local workers, who include also like that one kid's mom, which is supposed to be like the kid is supposed to be some type of a major thing in the film's narrative. But yeah, this separation happens, and in that moment, like it could almost look like that the film is not propaganda. Like it lends the movie the moment to say that, hey, look at this, we are also portraying a Chinese character in a negative light. Therefore, we are not propaganda. But what that moment really is about, it's about resonating with the class tensions inside China, where an ever-growing wealth gap has been undermining the acceptability of basically the old idea of letting some people get rich first. So, while that scene might at first seem like it's some type of a suppressive moment, it is fully in line with the policies of Xi Jinping's regime, which has been used not only nationalism, but also an anti-corruption campaign drawing on resentment of the rich to bolster the regime's legitimacy. And that angle, actually, like it still is, like I said, it's full on Xi Jinping, pro-Xi Jinping propaganda, but it at least, if nothing else, it's a bit more insidious, and at the same time a bit more smarter, bit more nuanced than the full-on in-your-face propaganda that we got in Battle of Lake Chanxing. And therefore, I actually do think that when if I would have to pick between Wolf Warrior and Battle at Lake Chanxing, what works in Wolf Warrior is the propaganda.
Yeah, agreed. What didn't work?
I couldn't escape the feeling like I said before, that this is mid-tier Steven Seagal. The action just did not grab me into its hold, and somehow and there are like a million things that affects into my feelings about Wolf Warrior films. It's bad CGI, it's terrible ADR, it's the lack of characters, it's the lack of stakes in action scenes. It's also the fact that they are shot in really cheap locations. One is in forest, the other is somewhere in Africa. So all of those come together, and in my opinion, the action in Wolf Warrior movies, including Wolf Warrior 2, just looks cheap.
Yeah, I mean, these are in no way special movies. The kind of a specialty for us comes from the sort of exotic nature of this being the Chinese blockbusters. But, I mean, look at this kind of a film in the context of a Hollywood movie and say that there's like a shred of any originality in these movies. And I'd say no. So there's a lot that didn't work. It's really run-of-the-mill in a way, even though it has some nice choreography to be seen. And I mean, professionals are at the helm, but at the same time, it's really hollow in its characters, in its story, and like you said, in its stakes. And therefore, I would say that the main reason for the success of Wolf Warrior 2 is in fact the Chinese movie market manipulation during the summer days of 2017. How about Wolf Warrior 1 and 2 in one word? What would that word be?
It would be... It's tricky because it's Wolf Warrior 1 and 2, but I'm saying smartish? Parentheses compared to Battle at Lake Changjing.
Does a whistle count? I can't whistle today. I don't know why. Will this film survive the test of time?
That's a tough one. That's actually a tough one. Not in the West. No, people will forget it. The question is, how about in China?
I think it's a movie that people will not watch much, but they will know of its existence thanks to its kind of getting into the, well, once again, to the kind of a daily lingo of China, the politics and all.
It could be. It could be. I was going to say no. I was actually thinking that even though, yeah, Wolf Warrior 2 was a major box office success, but I was kind of thinking that it's similar type of situation like something like in the West, for example, Michael Bay Transformers movies. Make a gazillion bucks at the box office, but give it 5 years, nobody remembers what happened in last night, for example. But now that you mentioned actually its effect on Chinese political lingo, perhaps yeah. Perhaps because of that, this actually would have a legacy, at least in China.
Complete the sentence. You really know you're watching Wolf Warrior films when?
You really know you are watching Wolf Warrior when the enjoyment you feel for being recruited to worship Xi Jinping takes a nosedive when you notice that fat kid is all about eating because fat kid, and fat older black woman starts singing Amazing Grace because, hey, the Americans did it in the 80s.
You really know you're watching Wolf Warriors when you smirk at references of Twitter and American Germany on a cheap drive through somewhere in Africa and continue smirking at everything really while someone is throwing 6 grenades on your face and you unwind by drinking water or spirits to impress girls or Africans depending on the day to show off your woo. Did you like the films?
I liked these more than Battle at Lake Changjing, but then again, that's kind of a low bar to get over. So, they ain't absolutely terrible, but I wouldn't necessarily say that I liked them.
Same here. I'm not even sure if these will survive the test of time in even China, other than for the name Wolf Warrior. because this is, and it's gonna be even more in the future, just your run-of-the-mill Americanized action movie with your Steven Seagal basics attached to it. So no, and I'm not even sure if I would rewatch these films when it comes to that.
Yeah, I'm strongly in the camp of no.
Right. Well, bummer. I think we already covered which one is the stronger film. So if I would put in order of preference, 2 comes first.
But how about it? Would you actually recommend these movies to an outsider?
Well, maybe it's the kind of bias showing in me. I would slightly recommend Sisu because of the settings and the culture that I am bound to by my birth given right, but to watch these, to recommend to watch these, if you're a hardcore movie fan and you want to know what's going on at the top of the box office in China for whatever reason, yeah, perhaps you don't need to even be a hardcore movie watcher to check it out, but I think you have a solid reason to watch it if you are a big movie buff to keep up on things. But for the casual viewer, I don't know. Think you can watch some other films too, and you might not be so interested to find out what's at the top of the box office in China. I would say that if you're gonna watch this, watch it for educational reasons only. And
Yeah,
that goes for number 2 specifically. Skip the number 1.
yeah. I'm with you on skip number 1. On my end, I would also skip number 2. The action, even at its best, with which is what it is in number 2, it never actually grabbed me. Somehow, like I've already said it, but somehow it felt surprisingly cheap, and the overall atmosphere is something that I've gotten already from Steven Seagal movies. Also, the fact that I'm surprised how bad the CGI, the ADR are in both of these films. You mentioned the fact that this shows the Chinese movies becoming Americanized, which, yes, it does. At the same time, that fact also means that there is no, like, real, I want to watch a Chinese movie, so I watch Wolf Warrior point to watch these movies, because they are so Americanized. And at the same time, as they are so Americanized, it's actually surprising to me how little they apparently have learned from the American films that came before these. I'm especially looking at the fact exactly how many of the same mistakes these movies make. And my biggest problem and my best example to give to everybody here would be the heavy leaning into the badass loner type. Just like Rambo's, Leng Feng here is the badass loner who doesn't follow orders, goes constantly against the system, his superiors, basically the military itself, which he then sworns that he is there to protect. He is, like the title says, he's a wolf warrior. And at the same time, that kind of a completely, absolutely shoots in the foot the idea that, like the second film says, that a soldier is a source of confidence even without the uniform, because the soldier kind of shows some type of a constant by his presence alone. But these lone wolf heroes, they fail to do that. You can't go against the army itself and at the same time somehow spread this aura of confidence to people around you. In fact, you would be the most dangerous dude on the battlefield because you don't listen to orders. And in the same way, like when these films wanna pull off that macho bullshit in a larger scale, when they wanna show when Leng Feng joins the Wolf Warrior squadron, they wanna show you how the other guys in the other wolf warriors come to meet him, and they roll out the tanks, and they have a stealth mission around Leng Feng and stuff like that, which is complete waste of money and so bullshit that you can't believe it. They all refuse to be servient to the military higher-ups. It's like a complete shit show. And this is a problem that the American badass loner flicks already did. I'm kind of surprised that coming like 40 years later, the Americanized Chinese movie just willy-nilly walks into every single exact same landmine that the American predecessors. It's like they knowingly refuse to learn anything from the mistakes that the Americans made. While at the same time, the film wants to somehow make the statement that China and made in China is somehow better than, the Western counterpart.
Yeah, that's kind of ironic that you have this heavily American-influenced movie and then you are making it about very patriotic subject matters, in my opinion. And this kind of an oddity to me, at least, that the lead character is somebody who actually does not obey the orders, even though he's an extremely patriotic person, or so he claims to be.
He's the patriot soldier who gets his ass kicked out of the army.
Yeah.
And he's constantly in trouble because he refuses to do what a soldier is supposed to do.
An anti-hero?
Also, he's a goddamn dumbass. Killing the Creator in the beginning of the second film in front of an entire police squad.
Yeah, what the hell was that?
Yeah, but it's okay because the military leadership also is just a bunch of dumbasses. Once Leng Feng is kicked out of the army and lands his ass in jail, Long Xiaxing, for some odd reason, still wants to marry him. And he's like, here is the marriage certificate. This is better be written when I return. And you're like, why? Why? What's going on here?
And I also remember there being many moments where I was wondering, why is this happening? And why is this coming out of the blue? And what does this mean? Some of the blame may be going to the subtitles. But for example, that scene when, you were mentioning that Leng Feng shoots the guy in front of the police forces. They're destroying the buildings. I know it is that...
they are tearing down the one... The one guy dies in Wolf Warrior 1.
Yeah.
And now they are tearing down the dead soldier's family's home.
Which are all next to each other, then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe in China they do put all the soldiers next to each other to live. Or it's some kind of near the barracks home. But yeah, there were many moments of confusion. Why this thing now? Okay, I think that's enough for today. Of course, we'd like to hear from our listeners if you have any differing opinions, new viewpoints to say on these two Chinese movies. Come tell us on the channels that we occupy on the interwebs.
Would that also be that for, Chinese propaganda on this podcast, at least for the time being?
For the time being, I think that's it.
Oh, thank heavens.
We tried.
We tried. Propaganda still isn't that interesting.
Yeah, but hey, see you in a fortnight.
Until then. Kuka saatana oli se muija, joka mahdollisesti lauloi Amazing Gracea?
Mä kutsun sitä vaan The African Supermama.
Okay.
What's our next episode about?
That's a good question. What is it about?
Karri ranting his head off about all the things that makes him psychotically fucking hateful towards some quirks in cinema industry.
I don't know if anybody wants to hear that.
I don't know either.
I'm still trying to have Xi Jinping's face tattooed in my left butt cheek here.